The final area I want to touch on um, before I talk about the 29th federal election, which I actually recorded yesterday on a 10-minute video. So don't be alarmed when you see the next video and you see that I'm in a different setup and a different set of clothes. Um, your eyes are not deceiving you. Anyway, that short talk is about the federal election. I just want to finish by this section today by looking at another aspect of the democratic deficit, which is the um, the voter turnout for one thing, but also the relationship mainly between the voter and the representative. Now, to me, this is a key element of the democratic deficit. Uh, Probably many people who are listening to this now, um, well, maybe not many people, but maybe some people at least, um, don't know who their representative is, um, or maybe they know their federal representative but don't know the provincial representative, or vice versa. And that's, in a way, not a criticism. That's almost an inevitable consequence of a representative democracy, where the voters are seemingly quite far away from the political system, only having very transitory engagement with it from time to time. And of course, the MPs change over time, politicians come and go. It's not always easy in our busy lives to keep up with who is representing us. That's one facet of this problematic relationship between we as the electors and they as the elected. Now, in theory, if we think of this as a principal agent problem, which I'm sure you've come across in many other of your classes, whereby the principal needs to get the agent to act as they wish. It's seen as a something of an ethical problem, but it's an economic problem as well, because it can lead to a lot of inefficiency and misallocation of resources, and a lot of waste within organisations if this relationship breaks down. Typically, in a corporate environment, it would be between the shareholders. It encapsulates the relationship between the shareholders on the one hand and the board of directors, the CEO on the other. How do the shareholders get the management to act in the way in which they see fit? Now, in a political environment, we, as the electors, are the sovereign body. The power and authority which is divested on politicians is derived from us. We are the sovereign people. The parliament should reflect the general will of the people, in other words, the majority opinion of the people. That, of course, also goes for that. That's talking about things in the federal level and in terms of the overall majority. But when we talk about our relationship between ourselves and the representative we elect, how do we ensure that the representative does what he said he was going to do when we elected him? This is a very tricky thing, because we don't. In Canada, we have no confidence votes in governments, which can be put together by an opposition in Parliament. But unless they've managed to secure some votes on the government side, then it's unlikely those will succeed. So they really only have limited application. We have no recall of representatives for any kind of political misdemeanor if they didn't keep their word on something, or if they change their mind. Well, that's no cause for recalling them. We have no system of recall on that count. In America, of course, they have impeachment. They have articles of impeachment for the president transgressing certain laws which are laid down as his responsibility. He has to adhere to these things. But we have nothing similar. Of course, they have a presidential system. We have an entirely different constitutional system to the US. So we can't really hold our representatives to account. If we elect someone and they say they're going to push for certain reforms in areas, or they're going to lobby the minister for higher expenditure on health and education and welfare, and then when they get to the parliament, they do the exact opposite, or they are inactive, or if they vote contrary to what they said they were going to do. There's nothing much we can really do about that. Now, this goes to an essential aspect of the representative system, is that we allow our representatives to use their judgment and their discretion, and in theory, based on their knowledge and their experience, they will come to sort of clear and measured decisions. Representatives are not delegates. Now, by that I mean they are not tasked with going to the federal parliament with a clear set of instructions in their hand, or a contract in their hand with the electors. The contract is an informal contract. They might issue a manifesto before the election saying they're going to do this and that. Of course, we've all had the leaders before any kind of election telling us what certain politicians are going to do, but there's no real sanction for us if they don't do that. They're not delegated. They're not tasked to do that exactly. So this is a little bit of a problem in a sense, that the representatives have this discretion, have this flexibility, or is it a problem? Maybe it's actually a good thing that we're allowing them to use their judgment. We have placed our confidence and trust in them. Presumably, putting that X on the ballot confers that trust upon them. The fact that we would go out of our way to do that indicates we have the confidence. We have confidence in them. This is really based on a very old idea of representation, that the member is a totally disinterested individual. He will use his discretion. He will act in what's the best interests of his riding, or his province, or his nation, and he won't have any particular interested motives. Of course, the public choice theorists would have a field day with such a view of representation and representative democracy. They would feel that this was a totally unreal scenario, and something which was an ideal rather than a reality. It was never going to be true. Perhaps it was true back hundreds of years ago, when representatives came from rich backgrounds where they could afford to be disinterested, where they were less corruptible, less susceptible to bribery. That was certainly the justification for this system. But in this day and age, it's much more difficult to see that these attributes of the system are actually in operation today. We've had enough scandals, we've had enough financial shenanigans going on over the years to show that we're all vulnerable to these things. Human beings are vulnerable to being corrupted, to being bribed, to looking after themselves, to promoting their own financial incentives. Now, I want to finish just this section by saying a little bit on a couple of theories relating to voting, which you might find referred to in the slides. A couple of pretty cute theories, actually, and not necessarily opposed to each other. One of them is called rational ignorance, and this refers to the idea that most people recognize, most voters recognize that they can do very little to change things within the system, and so the rational position would be not to vote, not to waste your time getting involved in politics or political life. Don't read the manifestos, don't read the policy proposals, don't bother with it all, because it's a waste of your time. Your time would be much better employed on something which is going to show some tangible gains for you. Now, I think this is an interesting theory, but of course the evidence for it is somewhat, well, it's not sparse, but I think we have to draw a distinction between people voting and people being politically active. I think there's a big difference between the two, and this was shown in a theory which kind of challenged the rational ignorance model, referred to as the paradox of voting. Now, the idea here was that it was accepted that many people felt the political system was unrepresentative, and it was a bit of a waste of time to get involved in it and to devote much time to it. But nevertheless, lots of people still turn out to vote. So how do you explain that? If rational ignorance is the default position for most people, that we see that we have very little influence as individuals in the political system? Why would we still go out to vote? What's the point? What's the point of voting? Well, I think we need to see this in terms of less in terms of an individual capacity, but perhaps more as when we think of ourselves as belonging to something bigger than ourselves. So I think when we vote, we're not necessarily just thinking of ourselves. We're voting for a set of ideas. We're voting for something bigger. We're voting, yes, for the person we're going to elect, the individual. And I referred a moment ago to this idea that we are conferring our trust on a particular individual to act in a certain way, to use his judgment, his intelligence, his or her judgment, intelligence, experience, knowledge, all of these things. But we're also perhaps voting for a set of ideas. We're voting for something which we think is going to make life better for ourselves or for the majority of the people that we are concerned about. So I think we could say that both theories have a place, in a sense that yes, we can see that there is a great deal of rational ignorance about this. There seems to be a lot of anecdotal evidence for this. But when we look at the paradox of voting theory, we can see that the empirical evidence is stronger, because we still have reasonably high turnouts for elections. We always get well in excess of 60% of people turning out to vote. And so this is an example, of course, of you could look at it two ways. You could say anything less than 100% it represents something of a democratic deficit and shows lack of enthusiasm for the system. That would be far too rigorous, of course, a position to take. But we generally don't do too badly in Canada, at least in terms of the voting turnout. I know that the recent federal election, the turnout was down from 2015, I think from 68 to 66. That might have represented something of a disillusionment with Trudeau and the Liberals, and it came in, of course, on a great wave of enthusiasm, and perhaps some of those hopes have been a little bit disappointed. That might be one reason for it. It could be there could be other reasons for it as well. Just a general sense of apathy, people not as much enthused with the system and with the hopes for change as they were in 2015. But I'm going to say a bit more about that in the other talk, which I recorded the other day. So I hope you've enjoyed these talks. Go on to the next one, which talks about the 2019 federal election. Then I'm going to put another one up in the next day or so regarding lobbying and special interests. So enjoy the rest of the day, and thank you very much for listening. Bye for now.